Why don't we complain? It was the very last coach and the only empty seat on the entire train, so there was no turning back. The problem was to breathe. Outside, the temperature was below freezing. Inside the roller car, the temperature must have been about 85 degrees. I took off my overcoat and a few minutes later my jacket and noticed that the car was flecked with the white shirts of the passengers. I soon found my hand moving to loosen my tie from one end of the car to the other as we rattled through Westchester country. We sweated, but we did not moan. I watched the train conductor appear at the head of the car. Tickets, all tickets, please. In a more virile age, I thought the passengers would seize the conductor and strap him down in a seat over the radiator to share the fate of his patrons. He shuffled down the aisle, picking up tickets, punching commutation cards. No one addressed a word to him. He approached my seat, and I drew up a deep breath of resolution. Conductor, I began with a considerable edge to my voice. Instantly, the doleful eyes of my seatmate turned tiredly from his newspaper to fix me with a resentful stare. What questions could be so important as to justify my sibilant intrusion into his stupor? I was shaken by those eyes. I am incapable of making a discreet fuss, so I mumbled a question about what time we were due to do in Stanford. I didn't even ask whether it would be before or after dehydration could be expected to set in. Got my reply and went back to my newspaper to wiping my brow. The conductor had nonchalantly walked down the gauntlet of aisles, sweating American freemen, and not one of them had asked him to explain why the passengers in that car had been consigned to suffer. There is nothing to be done when the temperature outdoors is 85 degrees and indoors the air conditioner has broken down. Obviously, when that happens, there is nothing to do except perhaps curse the day that one was born. But when the temperature outdoors is below freezing, it takes a positive act of will on somebody's part to set the temperature indoors at 85. Somewhere a valve was turned too far, a furnace overstocked, a thermostat maladjusted, something that could easily be remedied, but turning off the heat and allowing the great outdoors to come indoors. All this is so obvious. What is not obvious is what has happened to the American people. It isn't just the commuters whom we have come to visualize as a supreme breed who have got on to the trick of suspending their sensory faculties twice a day while they submit to the creepy dissolutions of the railroad industry. It isn't just they who have given up trying to rectify irrational vexations. It is the American people everywhere. A few weeks ago at the large motion theater, I turned to my wife and said, "The picture is out of focus." "Be quiet," she answered. I obeyed, but a few minutes later I raised the point again with mounting impatience. "It will be all right in a minute," she said apprehensively. She would rather lose her eyesight than be around when I make one of my infrequent scenes. I waited. It was just out of focus, not glaringly out, but out. My vision is 20/20, and I assume that is the vision adjusted of most people in the movie house. So after encountering my wife throughout the first reel, I finally prevailed upon her to admit that it was off focus and very annoying. We then settled down, coming to rest on the presumption that someone connected with the management of the theater must soon notice the blur and make the correction, or B, that someone seated near the rear of the house would make the complaint in behalf of those of us up front, or C, that any minute now the entire house would explode into cat calls and foot stamping, calling dramatic attention to the distortion. What happened was nothing. The movie ended as it had begun, just out of focus, and we trooped out. We stretched our faces in a variation of contortion to accustom the eye to the stock of normal focus. I think it is safe to say that everybody suffered on that occasion. I think it is safe to assume that everyone was expecting someone else to take the initiative and going back to speak to the manager. And it is probably true even that if we had supposed the movie would run right through the blurred image, someone surely would have summoned up the purposive indignation to get up out of his seat and file his complaint. But notice that no one did, and the reason no one did is because we are all increasingly anxious in America to be obtrusive, so we are reluctant to make our voices heard, hesitant about claiming our right. We are afraid that our cause is unjust, or that it is not unjust, that it is ambiguous, or if not even that, that it is too trivial to justify the horrors of a confrontation with authority. We will sit in our oven or endure a racking headache before undertaking a head-on, I'm here to tell you complaint. That tendency to passive compliance, to a headless endurance, is something to keep one's eye on in sharp focus. I myself can occasionally summon the courage to complain, but I cannot, as I have intimidated, complain softly. My own instinct is so strong to let the thing ride, to forget about it, to expect that someone will take the matter up when the grievance is collective in my behalf, that it is only when the provocation is at a very special key, whose vibrations touch stimulously the complex of nerves, allergies, and passions, that I catch fire and find the reserves of courage and assertiveness to speak. When that happens, I get quiet, carried away. My blood gets hot, my brow wet, I become unbearably and unconsciously sarcastic and bilious. I am grinded for a total showdown. Why should that be? Why could not I or anyone else on that railroad coach have said simply to the conductor, "Sir, I take that back. That sounds sarcastic. Conductor, what would be good enough to turn down the heat? I am extremely hot. In fact, I tend to get hot every time the temperature reaches 85 degrees. Strike that last sentence. Just end it with a simple statement that you are extremely hot, and let the conductor in for the cause." Every New Year's Eve I resolved to do something about the milquetoast in me, and vow to speak up calmly for my rights and for the betterment of our society. On every appropriate occasion, honoring last New Year's Eve, I was fortified in my resolve, because that morning at breakfast I had to ask the waitress 3 times for a glass of milk. She finally brought it after I had finished my eggs, which is when I don't want it anymore. I did not have the manliness to order her to take the milk back, but settled instead for a cowardly sulk, and ostentatiously refused to drink the milk, though I later paid for it, rather than stay plainly to the hostess, as I should have. Why had not drunk it, and would not pay for it. So by the time New Year ushered out the old, riding in on my morning's indulgence, and stimulated by the gastric juices of resolution that flowed too faithfully on New Year's Eve, I rendered my vow. Henceforward I would conquer my shyness by my disposition to suspiciousness. I would speak out like a man against the unnecessary annoyances of our time. 48 hours later, I was standing in line at a ski repair store in Pico Peak, Vermont. All I needed to get on with my skiing was alone for 1 minute of a small screwdriver to tighten a loose binding. Behind the counter in the workshop were 2 men. One was industriously engaged in servicing the complicated requirements of a young lady at the end of the line, and obviously he would be tied up for quite a while. The other, Jiggs, his workmate called him, was a middle-aged man who sat in a chair puffing a pipe, exchanging small talk with his working partner. My pulse began its telltale acceleration. The minutes ticked on. I stared at the idle shopkeeper, hoping to shame him into action, but he was impervious to my telepathic reproof, and continued his small talk with his friend, brazenly insensitive to the nervous demands of 6 good men who were raring to ski. Suddenly, my New Year's Eve resolution struck me. It was not over. It was now or never. I broke from a place in line and marched to the counter. I was going to control myself. I dug my nails in my palms. My effort was only partially successful. "If you are not too busy," I said icily, "would you mind handing me a screwdriver?" Work stopped, and everyone turned his eyes on me, and I